Welcome on Memorial Day weekend. I'm Tony Christ, and this is Sunshine and Transparency. That's the name of our program. And today, what better topic to discuss than what is liberty? What is it? What does it mean? Is it evident in the nationalistic fervor we're feeling today, where both political candidates are claiming to be nationalists? Of course, Mr. Trump's party is Make America Great Again. It's all about nationalism. Is that what liberty is, or is liberty something else? What do we have here that's different that we can define as liberty? And once we define it, has it changed, or is it the same over the last 200 and some years? Does it have the quality of being immutable once you define it? Or is it something that morphs into something else? We're going to talk about those things in a minute, but I want to welcome you to Sunshine and Transparency, the name of our program. This is our 31st topic, what is liberty? And we'd like to thank you for turning us on and watching us. And now let's just get into it. And let's talk about what is liberty. And the way we're going to talk about what is liberty, we're going to talk about transactions. And we're going to talk about transactions that are non-coercive. Now, what do I mean? What's a transaction that's non-coercive? Well, it's just about everything you can think of. Anything, when you go out and you buy your groceries, that's a non-coercive transaction. The supermarket sells you the groceries and they benefited from it. You buy them, or you wouldn't have felt that you benefited from them. So it's a win-win whenever you're in a non-coercive transaction. Now, whatever kind of transactions are there? Well, obviously, there are coercive transactions. So what is a coercive transaction? All right. Well, a coercive transaction is when a couple of thugs go to a 7-Eleven on a Saturday night with a Saturday night special and hold a gun up and rob the 7-Eleven. Now, that was coercive. They took the money by force. Both parties did not benefit. One party lost the money, the other got it. And that was a coercive transaction. Now, let me give you another example. When a court hammers down the gavel and says, Mr. Joe Blow, you owe that gentleman $100,000. That's also a coercive transaction, even though it occurred at the culmination of a legal process. It's coercive because the two parties did not win. The one party had to fork over the money due to a court decision. So that's a coercive. When the Congress rules and makes a law that they impose on our society, that's also a coercive process. When taxes are levied, my gosh, they're also coercive processes. We know we have to pay. We have to pay for things in common that we have in our country, but that doesn't mean it's non-coercive. So what is the difference between coercive monetary transactions, monetary transfers, and transactions that are you do on your own free volition, where two or more parties get together and they would not have done the transaction if they didn't feel it was beneficial? They wouldn't have done it. So the transaction, whether it's trading baseball cards, whether it's selling an automobile or buying an automobile or buying a house or a refrigerator, it would not have occurred if both parties didn't feel they had a gain. And that is a freedom that we cherish. It's free when we are in a social system where the majority of transactions we do are non-coercive. Now, there's a benefit to non-coercive transactions, and I'm going to turn it into arithmetic, and I'm going to explain it to you. In a non-coercive transaction, 1 plus 1 equals 3. You go, no, it doesn't. I mean, that's kindergartenish, isn't it? Not really. Let me explain. You have both parties, 1 plus 1, and you have the feeling of being better off when the transaction is done. So it's 2 plus that feeling makes it 3. Now, in a coercive transaction, it's a little different because there's no exchange. There's not an exchange of information or an exchange of property or an exchange of a commodity or material that was non-coercive. In a coercive transaction, by definition, one of the parties is taken kicking and screaming to the transaction. They didn't want to do it. So it always is the case. You have 1 minus 1 equals -1. And you say, well, why is that -1? Isn't 1 minus 1 0? Well, not really, because coercive transactions don't usually occur in nature. They only occur with a third party, an intermediary, and the expense of a third party to impose a coercive transaction. And it takes a criminal to rob a bank. It takes a courtroom process to cause party A to pay party B. It takes a room full of legislators being paid to come up with a law to enforce on society. So due to the cost of coercive transactions, they're always a sum loss. It's not just plopping up a pile of money and moving it from A to B. The transaction cost reduces that pile of money. Where in a transaction that's non-coercive, there always is a benefit greater than the value of the transaction because both parties left feeling better off. So we want to be, in our society, the majority of transactions, the majority of exchanges are non-coercive. And that's a more free system. And that really embellishes our concept of freedom. So freedom shouldn't be measured entirely by differences in wealth. Now, there's a whole group of people philosophizing, and there are political theories that actually evidence themselves in very shouty economics about closed economic systems, fascism, socialism, communism. They're all a system of beliefs, but they don't have economic fundamental roots, and they don't expand wealth and welfare because the predominant amount of behavior is forced coercive transactions. So forced coercive transactions contract your wealth and welfare. They shrink it. They don't grow it, they shrink it. So if your wealth and welfare is shrinking, you're not in a social system where you have a great amount of hope of being better off. In a transaction-based system, which is non-coercive, which only has a minimum amount of legal and government coercion and a minimum amount of crime, and the majority of actions are non-coercive, you expand wealth and welfare. And this economic explanation underlies or underpins liberty. And there's a word in economics called consumer sovereignty. And basically, it means you're the boss of the money in your pocket. You are, not the government. And anything the government or the political establishment does to inhibit or reduce that consumer sovereignty is a complete attack on the individual. And oftentimes, where you have fervor in nationalistic policies, today, you see Americans are very patriotic. And I certainly don't want to dismiss that because I'm an American. I'm free enough to do this podcast. I'm very happy about that. But if you go to China, you'll see a surge in nationalism in China, and you'll see that the Chinese are investing at least as much as we are in defense, and they're preparing a high state of military alertness in the country. And in Russia, Putin, in his roundabout way, is trying to cause nationalism among Russians in a similar manner. And you're seeing it in various areas of the globe. You're seeing it in Palestine and bordering Muslim countries that are unifying and feel nationalistic about their religious beliefs and feel they're being violated. So there's this heightened level of nationalism, be it the MAGA group in the United States, be it the Chinese, be it the Russians, be it Palestinians, is not correlated to liberty. It doesn't, just because a person says, I want to make America great again. Well, of course we do. It's not the feeling of nationalism itself, oftentimes is a reaction to a social system that is drifting away from a transaction-based, non-coercive basis of trade in the system. And once that deviation occurs, individuals feel economically pressured. You see, the only way a non-coercive transaction-based system can survive is by having the liberty and the sovereignty of being the boss of your own money. If the state passes rules and laws that restrict that, for example, the spree of tariffs we've been suffering under for 3 or 4 years. Now, albeit in some instances due to dumping or national security, a tariff might be called for. But tariffs in general directly attack your consumer sovereignty. The fact that you're the boss of the money in your own pocket by the country, by imposing a tax on buying products that are not manufactured in your country, but are much less expensive, denying you the opportunity to spend the rest of that money in America. You have to commit an extra amount of money to that one product that was made in America. For example, EVs from China that are now being tariffed cost roughly $11,000 to $12,000. And they're imposing very large tariffs on them in excess of 100%, so that they don't threaten U.S. manufacturers, where an EV might cost $36,000. Now, if you paid $12,000 for a Chinese EV, well, my God, you'd have $24,000 left to spend in America, and your consumer sovereignty would be enhanced because you would be the boss of your own money. You could spend it on restaurants. You could spend it on rents, on clothes. You could spend it on a down payment on a house. So it's a significant amount of money. But when tariffs are imposed, they tend to raise prices. They tend to be inflationary. They're not a good thing. Both candidates for president have upheld existing tariffs and are threatening to impose new tariffs. That somewhat scares me. It's a direct attack on consumer sovereignty. It's a direct attack on liberty. If we don't respect comparative advantage, the fact that some parts of the world are just better than we are at making certain things, that doesn't mean other things don't emerge to allow us to devote our attention to things that we're good at. Then we fall into a trap of inflicting harm on ourselves. And sometimes governments will create fear to cause you to believe you have to harm yourself, i.e., a tariff. So liberty only works in a system that is the majority of the transactions are non-coercive, and a minimum amount of economic transfers, which are always coercive and almost always shrink wealth and welfare. And that's why systems like Russia have been in a cycle of contraction for 20 or 30 years. Now, China is a little anomalous because they actually have very limited freedoms that have allowed human beings to obtain wealth and create wealth expansion that benefits large amounts of people around them. And I've never really seen a system quite like China's, but it basically is a Maoist form of communism, which is a closed system, which believes that the ultimately most of the power rests with the Communist Party. And in either case, if you're not a member of the Communist Party in China or Russia, and Russia about 2,000 people are, I don't know how many in China, you're out of luck. The chances of you becoming wealthy are very remote. And so even in China, there is that inhibition that comes down from the state on people. And therefore, their consumer sovereignty, them being the boss of their own money, is limited. Now, you know, there's great divisions in the world over beliefs that the differences in wealth today exploit the lower wealth earners. And that's been a constant theme of almost every revolutionary that has overturned a government uh, going back hundreds of years. And that's basically the theme of the Communist Party. But the problem is they don't enhance liberty after they wrestle away control from whoever held control in that country before. And the entity that emerges oftentimes is very similar to the entity that existed. Arguably, Russia under the czars with 2,000 nobility, and Russia under the Communist Party with one leader and 2,000 Communist Party members. There's very little difference in the structure. And in China, you can argue a similar thing. But the Chinese do practice a soft form of warfare against our freedoms that we're not paying enough attention to. So, and where do our freedoms come from? Well, they come from the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence indirectly. And they empowered the individual and they empowered the family, and they minimized at that time in writing the role of government, be it municipal, state, or federal. It was minimized. Most of the rights and freedoms were kept for the individual and the family. Now, that is changing in America, and I might add, not for the better, but it is changing. And we have to keep an eye on it because there are clearly threats today that have emerged that threaten our variability, like to do this podcast and go up and talk about liberty. But it's important to remember one thing when people that buy into the dogma that they're unfortunate and others are fortunate, that it's important to remember that as long as there's hope and opportunity, which is a byproduct of liberty in a system, and there's an open transaction, non-coercive economy that invites hope and opportunity, when you accomplish something, be it ever so small, you feel the same reward as if you were a billionaire accomplishing something for $100 million. The feeling you have is self-rewarding. And when you do transactions that are non-coercive, you gain a little after every transaction. That's important to remember. So, and that's the incentive to do more. And that's where the growth is rooted. It's rooted in hope and opportunity in a system where the consumer is sovereign. There's consumer sovereignty. And what does that mean again? It means I'm the boss of my own money. That's really profound. So when you look at the Constitution and how the nation started, the Constitution itself said we should only do 5 major tasks. And that was it, not 6. Do 5 things and do them well. That's what the Constitution said. And what were those 5 things the Constitution said? Well, defense, state, the ability to negotiate with foreign countries, justice, our court system in America, treasury, our money, and a combination of departments and independent agencies that became commerce. 5, not 6, 5, and do them well. And what's happened today? Well, our government is doing 2,000 things, and we're doing, frankly, a terrible job. So the Constitution was very specific. And what about all the other decisions to be made? Why was the Constitution concerned about limiting the federal government to only 5 things? Well, because they wanted to leave most of the decisions to the states and to the people, which is outlined in the Bill of Rights, the first 10 original items in the Bill of Rights.
Then I'm top. But if it's going to be worse than the status quo, we can't vote for that, and that's why the Senate rejected it.
I was thinking of talking a little bit about the Kentucky resolutions in 1798 by Thomas Jefferson. But basically, today, we're not as free as we were back 50 years ago. Okay. We're in a very regulated environment where unelected government bureaucrats are passing, 30,000 regulations a year. God only knows what they are. We don't even know what they are, let alone how can we abide by them. They bear the weight of law. We know that. So the environment's not the same. Our tax returns aren't simple and understandable like they used to be. They're 30-some volumes. They're salt and peppered with so many court appearances and legal decisions. But things like freedom of speech still exist. Like I wouldn't be able to do this podcast in Russia or China. And there are a number of things, but they are at risk today. And that's why I'm trying to make that point about liberty. It is at risk. I think Ronald Reagan said it must be earned every generation, and it's at constant risk of being lost. And I do believe that's true. The rules of engagement between government and the population have dramatically changed over the century. The Constitution is no longer able to chain down the government, which was the basic premise of the Kentucky resolutions. The intent of the Constitution, according to Thomas Jefferson in 1798, was to chain down the government. It wasn't to give the government unlimited power. They had just broken from King George and they wanted to be free. The states wanted to be free of having that level of oversight. So the intent was to chain down the government and protect us as individuals. It was the greatest form of protection. And that's why we were granted the rights in the Declaration and the Bill of Rights, which trumped laws. The rights we were granted, freedom of speech, life, liberty, and the pursuit in the Declaration, trump any law. And therefore, they're not changeable by a new group of politicians who might not like a particular law and might change it and it would have a derogatory effect. The thing I want to point out is a quote made in 1787 and repeated by Ben Franklin in 1787. And actually, if you go back to Cicero in 60 BC, he's really the first one that said this. And it comes in the way of a warning for liberty. But before I give you the quote, I want to conclude by going over what liberty is. Liberty is having the decision making in a society rest largely with the individuals, not a remote bureaucrat in the state capitol. Every time the guy may have a degree from Harvard, he may be very intelligent, but he doesn't know whether I like vanilla or chocolate ice cream. Okay. And he's not respective of my decision making. And he doesn't need to be making those kind of decisions. That's what the Constitution did. It was to chain down the government. I can't say that enough times. Thomas Jefferson certainly did, to protect us from our own government. Unfortunately, the chains of the Constitution have been long broken or loosened, if not completely broken. And prior to 1980, the family used to be the strongest political unit in America. Subsequent, and actually starting in 65 with welfare, the family strengths have migrated up to the federal level by taking over responsibility for paying for single parent families, for unemployeds and whatnot. They've taken the decision making away with the nominal monies they're paying. Also with HIPAA's amended rule on declaring that 18-year-olds have privacy. Many have privacy from their own families. Well, that's another very destructive thing to the supremacy of the family unit, and led in some instances to very bad consequences, and very seldom led to a good consequence. So gradually in America, the federal government has been taking over. Also in the medical area today, the federal government is spending 53.6% of the medical expense, which is totaling over 17% of GDP. That's huge. We're going to talk about that in 2 weeks. But these things are taking away our decision-making and our independence, and relegating them to insurance schedules, which doctors have to pay attention to get paid, and not what's going on with us as an individual. So gradually, the system has been going against the little guy all along, and has been paving the way for very big entities, big companies, big billionaire individuals have been flourishing in this system, while smaller people have been frankly getting crushed. So that gets me to the warning that Cicero made in 60 BC, and that Ben Franklin made in 1787, and Alexander Tyler, a Scottish historian, a professor, made also in 1787. But before I give you the warning, I have to tell you, it's a sober day because many Americans have lost their lives, and Memorial Day is dedicated to them. I had an immigrant father who survived the Christian Holocaust, and he was conscripted into the work battalions in Turkey, and almost perished, and fought so hard and loved America so much to get to America. I feel as if he was in the military of sorts too, even though he was never formally in the US military. He really loved America, as many immigrants do. And so these three gentlemen, what did they say? What warning did they put out that is a threat to liberty, to our liberties? Well, here's what Professor Taylor said in 1787, a direct quote, that society goes from bondage to spiritual faith, from spiritual faith to great courage, from courage to liberty, from liberty to abundance. And I think it's important. That's where that's where we are. And from abundance to complacency, exactly where we are. Then from apathy to dependence, and from dependence back into bondage. And I do believe we are at a point that we're transitioning from abundance to complacency. It's sad to describe it that way, but when you say things that ring true from hundreds of years ago, people should pay attention to them. They tend to repeat. And that's not to say that I have any specific knowledge of what our future will be. But I do realize the level of complacency in America is off the charts. And with 70% of the population suffering from obesity, I don't think hunger for calories is our primary problem. And I do hope that people will keep one thing in mind and strive in what they're attempting to learn for the truth. Sunshine and transparency is about the truth. That's what we feel we're here for. And we hope we're a bit of a wake-up call for America. So I'm going to read it one more time before I wish you all a very blessed Memorial Day weekend. And whatever activities you're doing, whatever you're doing. And I'm going to read it one more time because it does present a somber moment for me on Memorial Weekend, and I hope it's communicated to you. Ben Franklin, Taylor, and Cicero, 60 BC, all essentially said the same thing. And I'm going to quote Professor Taylor from 1787. Society goes from bondage to spiritual faith, from spiritual faith to great courage, from courage to liberty, from liberty to abundance, from abundance to complacency, from apathy to dependence, and from dependency back to bondage. And don't think we're immune to that. So have a blessed week. I'm going to tell you that next week we're going to talk about in loco parentis and the effect it's having on the school system in particular and our young children. I hope you'll stay tuned. I hope you'll watch again. Our podcast, if you don't watch it on the internet, our podcast is posted every week on odysseyinvestments.info, all one word, odysseyinvestments.info, or we're on the internet as Sunshine and Transparency on YouTube. So have a blessed Memorial Weekend. I'll look forward to seeing you next week. God bless you all, and thank you.